walking canines, werewolves among us. The stories of these creatures are in the thousands, and yet they are portrayed as tall tales, fiction, and bullshit. But the UFO phenomenon was told in the same manner. But as of recent, we find that's not the case, as our government is now acknowledging. The truth is within the shadows. You decide. The Martins' encounter with the Palmyra wolves. The Martin family in Palmyra, Maine had a terrifying experience being trapped in their home by 5 giant wolves that walked on 2 legs. What were these strange creatures? Eric and Shelley Martin and their family lived in a quiet farm in Palmyra in rural Maine. The farm is surrounded by dense woods, which the family loved to venture into for hunting. The family had an extensive collection of hunting weapons stored in their barn, locked away in a strong box. Eric headed out into the woods to investigate with his son Sean. As they got closer to the lights, they suddenly went out. The men suddenly felt a feeling of extreme fear and decided to return home. The following day, the Martins' daughter Chelsea and her boyfriend came to visit and went for a walk in the woods with the dogs. While they were walking, the dogs caught on to a scent and ran after excitedly. When Chelsea and Nathan caught up to the dogs, they were sniffing around a big round hole in the ground that looked perfect to be natural. Nathan was curious and wanted to investigate further, but Chelsea was too frightened, and the couple returned to the farmhouse. A few weeks later, Memorial Day weekend, Shelley was making her evening coffee as usual. It was a particularly misty evening. Eric was trying to put the dogs in their kennels for the night, but they didn't want to leave his side. Something was frightening them. Suddenly, Eric heard a strange noise coming from the woods. Eric yelled out to Shelley to get back into the house. Shelley saw 5 sets of eyes staring back at them from the woods. They both rushed inside and locked the door. The couple peered out the window to see 5 huge wolf-like creatures stalking around their garden. They were huge, and Eric knew they weren't bears. They alternated between walking upright on 2 legs and running on all 4. Shelley ran around the house, closing all the windows and locking the doors. The dogs were hiding together in a corner. Eric wanted to go to the barn to get his guns. Eric went on the porch, heading to the barn. He saw the creatures standing there staring at him in the dark. He waved his arms around to get the security light to come on. The creatures lunged towards him, but when they reached the light, it was like something was holding them back. Eric abandoned his plan to get the guns and ran back inside. The Martins called the police, hoping to get some help, but there was none to be had. The police refused to send anyone and told the family to just stay inside and keep all the doors and windows locked. The Martins woke up the kids, grabbed any sharp instruments they could find, and huddled together on the Eric and Shelley's bed. When morning came, the creatures were finally gone. The following morning, the family went outside to investigate. There was no sign of the creatures, just huge footprints with enormous claws left in the mud. Many of the footprints belonged to a creature walking on just 2 feet. The Martins aren't the only people to have had experiences with very large bipedal wolf-like creatures in rural Maine. There have been several very similar reports over the last few decades that are yet to be explained. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman that charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear. A bear cannot move how it did, and it was not a normal wolf, as they can't comfortably run on 2 legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at this. This happened around June or July of. I was around 17 years old and cockier then, but still somewhat knowledgeable about the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in NW, Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer, and I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin, or at least by the bonfire by the beach because of bears, wolves, and cougars. So, this happened somewhere between noon and 2 p.m. Me and my cousin were standing at the edge of a clearing on a trail talking. He was maybe 10 feet from me when I decided to mess with him. I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet. I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. What I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, but it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs crouching next to a tree. Its arm was grasping the trunk with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go, and next thing I know he is sprinting. I looked back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all 4s. It charged us, and it sounded like it was right on our tails barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason it let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 feet tall when upright, and where it should have had front paws it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears only waddle on 2 legs. I was in northern Maine about 18 years ago, looking at a large piece of property, approximately 250 acres, that I was considering purchasing. The area was about 90 minutes driving northwest of Houlton, Maine. I think the area was between Stockholm and Eagle Lake. The realtor told me the property was remote, and at a certain point inaccessible with the vehicle I was driving. I parked my car near what I thought was the entrance to the property and got out. As I walked about 1,000 feet into the property, I heard and felt the presence of something behind me. It was about 4 p.m., so I figured it was my imagination getting the best of me since I was alone. I turned around slowly, and of course nothing was there. I then saw something in the corner of my eye that startled me. It was a large swath of snow that was covered in red. It had snowed a little recently, so it was a pinkish color, but it was most definitely blood. The area it covered was approximately 12 feet across. As I bent down to observe and inspect the area, with my back to the path I had been walking down, I felt something behind me, like someone or something was breathing down my neck. I turned around to again find nothing. Without getting up, I looked to my right and saw several tracks in the snow. I figured it was a few bears, but I did not take any pictures. I did get a picture of the bloodied area, though. After I observed the tracks, I heard something rustling about 30 feet from me, but it did not last long. I stood up and slowly walked back to my car. I thought that if I ran, something would chase after me, like my neighbor's Rottweiler. Just as I was getting back into my car, I looked down and saw a bunch of animal tracks around the car I was driving. As I got into the car and locked the door, I looked down the path to the area where I discovered the blood in the snow, and I thought I saw something crouching down. By this time, it was a little after 5 and I was scared. When I started the car, I most definitely saw movement, as if something was turning its head in the direction of where I was sitting. I put the car in reverse, and the wheels started to spin because I had parked on top of a log or something. I was able to move and left the property as quickly as I could without getting stuck again. I did not turn my car around until I got to the road. When I got to the road and was driving away, I swear I saw something just beyond the tree line in the woods watching me leave. I felt a little unsettled because of this experience, and as soon as I got back to Houlton, I went to my hotel, locked the doors, and slept with the light on. The next day, when I was getting coffee, I told a local of my experience. He just looked at me and said, "Bears do not travel in packs." Shape-shifting werewolf of Texas. Mrs. Delbert Gregg of Gregton, Texas, told of her encounter with a shape-shifting creature in the 1960 issue of Fate. The other surveyed sightings below are of creature that looked like man-wolves, but no one have seen one becoming another. Mrs. Gregg have not seen a man turned into a wolf, but she has actually come closer than anyone else in telling a tale that sounds like a chapter from a werewolf novel than a real-life experience. Mrs. Gregg said that one night in 1958, when her husband was on a business trip, she moved her bed close to a screen window, hoping to catch some cool breeze from a thunderstorm brewing on the southwestern horizon. She heard a scratching sound from the window shortly after she fell asleep. In a flash of lightning, she saw a huge, shaggy wolf-like creature clawing at the screen and staring at her with baleful, glowing, slitted eyes. She saw its bare white fangs. The creature fled from the yard into a clump of bushes as she leaped from her bed to grab a flashlight. Mrs. Gregg said, "I watched for the animal to come out of the bushes, but after a short time, instead of a great shaggy wolf running out, the figure of an extremely tall man suddenly parted the thick foliage and walked hurriedly down the road, disappearing into the darkness." Wisconsin werewolf sighting. Mark Shackleman was driving east of Highway 18 near Jefferson in southeastern Wisconsin on an evening in 1936 when he saw a figure digging in an Indian mound. He saw a hair-covered creature that is over 6 feet tall with both ape-like and dog-like features with pointed ears standing erect. Its hands have shriveled thumb and a forefinger on each and 3 fully formed fingers. Shackleman went back to the sighting the next evening, hoping to see the creature again, and he did. The creature was making neo-human sounds with a 3-syllable growling. Years later, his son, who is a Kenosha newspaper editor, wrote that his father's first thought was that it must be something satanic. In southeastern Wisconsin, several decades later, equally enigmatic beasts would figure in a host of reports. Werewolf attack reported in New Mexico. 4 Gallup, New Mexico youths allegedly encountered a werewolf along the side of a road near Whitewater one day in January 1970. One witness reported, "It was about 5 feet 7, and I was surprised it could go so fast. At first I thought my friends were playing a joke on me, but when I found out they weren't, I was scared. We rolled up the windows real fast and locked the doors of the cars. I started driving faster at about 60, but it was hard because that highway had a lot of sharp turns. Someone finally got a gun out and shot it. I know it got hit and fell, but there was no blood. I know it couldn't be a person because people cannot move that fast." Red-eyed werewolves of Pennsylvania. In the fall of 1973, western Pennsylvania played host to dozens of reports of strange ape-like creatures, sometimes seen in association with UFOs, said to have, in one witness's words, fire-red eyes that glow in darkness. Being 7 to 8 feet tall gives off a strong, unpleasant odor. Another type of creature investigator Stan Gordon noted was said to be between 5 and 6 feet tall. It was described as looking just like an extremely muscular man with a covering of thick, dark hair. Again, in these reports, the arms were very long and hung down past the knees. This creature appeared to have superior agility exceeding that of a deer. From footprints discovered, the stride of creatures varies between 52 and 57 inches. In these reports, there was no indication of odors. Wisconsin werewolf attack. On October 31, 1991, at 8:30 p.m., a woman drove on Bray Road near Delavan, Wisconsin, which is approximately 30 miles south-southeast of Jefferson, site of Shackleman encounter in 1936. Felt her right front tire jump off the pavements if it had hit something. The woman stopped her car and looked into the misty darkness and saw a dark, hairy creature with a bulked-out chest racing towards her. She went back into her car and tried to speed away when the creature leaped onto her trunk. The creature eventually fell off from the trunk because the trunk was too wet to have a firm grip. Later, the woman returned with a friend, and they had a glimpse of a big form rising from the side of the road. Wisconsin werewolf encounter. Lorianne Andrizzi had a similar encounter as above in the fall of 1989. She was driving on Bray Road, a half a mile away from the above encounter, where she thought it was a person kneeling in a hunched position at the edge of the road. She slowed down, and to her surprise, the figure stared at her at no more than 6 feet across the passenger side of the car. The figure was covered with grayish-brown hair, with big fangs and pointed ears. His face was long and had a snout like a wolf, she told reporter Scarlett Sankey. The figure's eyes glowed in the darkness, and they were a yellowish gold color. The arms were really a kind of strange, jointed like a man or woman would be, she said. He was holding his hands with his palms upward. The arms were muscular, like a man who had worked out a little bit. The back legs looked like they were behind him, like a person kneeling. The sighting lasted about 45 seconds, and she had no idea what the creature could have been, until she saw an illustration at the library of a werewolf. Werewolf sighting. Around that same time as above in Elkhorn, near Delavan, a dairy farmer named Scott Bray saw a strange-looking dog along his pasture on Bray Road. It was bigger and taller than a German shepherd. It had pointed ears and hairy tail, with long, scraggly grayish-black hair. It is built heavy in front, a really strong chest. In the soft soil nearby, he found enormous footprints which were 4 to 5 inches in diameter. Werewolves Among Us. The night of August 12 into August 13th, we were moving out of our bungalow home that was surrounded by forests in a small town. My partner had taken a carload of items to the new home, while my 4-year-old son and I stayed behind. I was in the living room when I heard my son scream. I ran into his room to see an extremely large, black-gray-brownish, super furry arm with 3 claws wrapped around my son's neck, trying to pull him out the window. I screamed, the dog barked, and the creature let him go. The window to his room didn't have a screen and opened outward, like old-school style windows, with a crank. Initially, I thought it was Bigfoot, so I asked my son repeatedly, did it have a monkey face or look like a person? He was insisting it had a dog face, a long dog face with sharp front teeth like a dog. Within 5 minutes of his brush with death, large rocks, small boulders began being thrown at our home. What really got me about the whole situation was the fact that we were totally defenseless. What was packed into the car for moving was every weapon we had, every gun, machete, knife, bat, anything that could have been used as a weapon. So, this thing knew that. It watched us and waited until we were at our most vulnerable to attack. I never believed in werewolves before that night. I don't know if anyone believes me. I know for a fact what I seen, and it was physically impossible for that to have been a person or a Bigfoot. That thing had a hand that looked similar to a human mixed with an animal, meaning 5 digits, long fur coving the outside of each digit, black pad on the underside of each digit, yellowish ivory claws at the end of each digit. Last winter in 2018, there was an outbreak of werewolf attacks in a series of frenzied savagery all across the distant Indian state of Manipur, east of the Himalayas. Poultry fowls were cut clean in half, eaten the parts about and along with the visceral internal organs. Goats, sheep, swan, and piglets suffered the same clean-cut death, as if a sharp samurai sword had dispatched each victim with a single expert stroke. At first it was some isolated incidents that occurred in faraway mountain villages. Soon the frequency jumped up. Towns and villages reported attacks. It became prime-time news, with the TV showing the pieces of victims and poor weeping farmers in tears. The mystery deepened with the cold, frosted winter nights. The experts argued that predators were coming down from the mountains, most possibly large mountain wolves. But that was only a theory. No one had seen the predators. It gave a strange, eerie, supernatural frightfulness to the mad mystery. Then, further attacks. No sight of the attackers. The whole country cried out in alarm. Citizens patrolled the dark, foggy streets. The crowd ran wild on cold nights. Pandemonium. More uproar came with each fresh attack. Still, no one sighted the attackers. Then suddenly, all became quiet. It ended as it began. The attacks stopped and ceased. Weeks passed. Months went by. People forgot and went about their business. Luckily, no humans yet got attacked. The mystery was never solved. These stories are in every state and on every continent across the globe. I believe without a doubt these creatures walk among us, within the shadows. If you would like to share your story or encounter, please email me. The link is in the bio. Thanks for listening.